the basic qualification for our entry together with Jesus into the presence of God the Father, the heavenly presence, is a clean conscience. From one point of view, you could say that the whole of Hebrews as a sermon aims to deliver a good conscience. It's liturgical preaching. It's liturgical preaching, talking to people who are about to go to Holy Communion, to prepare them, to give them a good conscience, to go to Holy Communion with a clear conscience, and then to be equipped to live as God's holy people in their station and vocation with a good conscience. Luther's teaching on the conscience derives in large part from both Peter, chapter 3, and most especially from Hebrews. So we have been sprinkled from a bad conscience, an evil conscience, and that means that we then have a good conscience, and with a good conscience we are perfected for service together with Jesus as a high priestly brotherhood in the heavenly sanctuary. We've been cleansed for divine service. So this whole section draws together the teaching of Hebrews on the work of Jesus as high priest. Not so much on what he does for us, but what we receive from Jesus as our high priest. Through Jesus, we have access to God the Father by faith. With the full assurance of faith, we can draw near to God the Father with a good heart, a true heart, in the full assurance of faith to receive the gifts that he gives to us. Let us draw near. There's two let us draw nears. The first one was at the end of chapter 4, and the second one is here. If you wanted to put the purpose of Hebrews in a nutshell, it's contained in that. Let us draw near to God the Father with a true heart in the full assurance of faith, having our hearts, our conscience sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. That sums up the message of Hebrews. So, through Jesus, we have access to God the Father. We have access to the throne of grace in the divine service. Now, I told you that I wanted to tell you a story about what it is that people are missing who are, as many people do, who only believe that Holy Communion is a memorial meal, remembering what Jesus did for us 2,000 years ago, and it has no real function to perform in the life of faith, except to remind us what we already have, which is a reminder that Jesus died for us, that he sacrificed his life for us. That's the dominant view of Holy Communion here amongst almost all Protestants in North America. They're missing out on so much. Some years ago, I supervised a student from Papua New Guinea who did a thesis for me on the use of blood in his traditional culture, and then the use of blood and the teaching of blood in evangelism with his people. So, the role of blood in his traditional culture. Now, in New Guinea, the people were originally animists. And for animists, everything has to do with spirits. You're surrounded at all sides by a spiritual world. The spiritual world's invisible. There's only one thing that is both physical and spiritual, and that one thing is blood. And so all their most important ceremonies traditionally were done with blood. And it's amazing reading his thesis just how important blood was in all aspects of their life. He grew up in a tribal group where one half of them were converted by Roman Catholic priests, missionaries, and the other half were Lutherans. Oh, I know it was half, but in any case there was a section that was Lutheran and there was another section that was Catholic. The Lutherans were astonished some years ago when a deputation came from their Catholic tribesmen on the other side, and they said they wanted to become Lutheran. They were astonished because this doesn't happen. It's not supposed to happen. It's not written in the rule book. And when the leaders of his church asked them, "Why do you want to become Lutheran?" He said, "Because that's the Catholic missionaries, keep back the best part. They give us the body, but they don't give us the blood. We want to become Lutheran because that's the best thing that we can possibly have is the blood of Jesus." They were far better theologians than most of us. They knew the significance of what Jesus gives when he says, "Take and drink. This is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you for the remission of sins." Blood, very, very important. And I think I've already said that almost half, I think more than half the references to blood in the New Testament are found in the book of Hebrews, interestingly. And if the Hebrews, as I maintain, is a liturgical sermon that preaches, that alludes to the Lord's Supper, it doesn't preach directly on the Lord's Supper, it alludes to the whole divine service and to Holy Communion. The focus in Hebrews is not on the real presence of Jesus' body. You can see it in a couple of places, but the focus is on not the significance, the function of the blood of Jesus in Holy Communion and its centrality in the life of us as Christians. But now, yes, I might tell you another one of my favourite stories at the end. We'll move to the next section unless there's some questions on this.
I just remember that one story you told about the woman.
That's the one I want to tell.
Okay, that's good.
My favourite story that I tell all over the place and I'm never tired of telling.
Oh, it's a wonderful.
It's a wonderful story. Well, then they miss out on the best part, which is chapter 12. We'll see how we go. And yeah, stick around. The sermon culminates in the depiction of two theophanies in chapter 12. Now, what's theophany? Theophany is the manifestation of God. Theophany, we've spoken about that. Now, the great theophany of God to his people in the Old Testament was Mount Sinai. Now, what is the equivalent to God's theophany to the people of the Old Covenant at Mount Sinai? Remember, that's where God made his covenant with them. That's where God gave them the tabernacle, the priesthood and the divine service, all those great gifts. That's when God consecrated Israel as a holy nation, a royal priesthood, and he, in that covenant, established their mission as his people. They were to be a priestly people because God had chosen them from all the nations of the world in order to bring God's blessing to all the nations of the world. So their role in the universal scheme of things was not political but was liturgical, to represent the nations of the world before God and to bring the blessing of God to all the nations of the earth. Liturgical function. Now, that's Mount Sinai. You wouldn't think that it couldn't get much better than that. However, it does get better. We have a second mountain, which is Mount Sinai, not Mount Zion. There's one tradition of the Old Testament which speaks about two significant holy mountains, Sinai and Mount Zion, the site of the temple in Jerusalem, as the place of theophany, where God appears to his people every day in the divine service. But the contrast is not between this earthly mountain with earthly Jerusalem, but heavenly Zion. Heavenly Jerusalem. Now, just a little riff on the imagery of mountains and the significance of mountains. Everywhere in the ancient world, but also in many parts of the world to the present time, mountains are not just mountains. So, for example, if you visit India, or if you visit many parts of Asia, go up to Indonesia, Bali, if you go to Malaysia, if you go to Thailand, you'll find that mountains are the places quite regularly where temples are built. Mountains are places where you expect to find temples. And the idea is the following, that the mountains are the one place here on earth where heaven and earth overlap. This was so strong in the ancient world, that understanding, that in places where they didn't have mountains, places like Iraq, where it's a flat plain with the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. Take, for example, Babylon was built on a very flat piece of land. They built an artificial mountain because there was no existing mountain. It's the great ziggurat that still remains there, which is then the prototype, or goes back to earlier, the Tower of Babel, which is not a tower, it's a ziggurat. And the idea is then that you build an artificial mountain, and then at the top of that mountain you have the temple of God. In Babylon it was the temple of the god Marduk, and that ziggurat and the temple on top of that mountain was called the Gate of Heaven. The Gate of Heaven. This was the place where the king, who was also high priest, would ascend during the great feast, in which the whole nation celebrated the coronation of Marduk, their supreme god. He would ascend to that place to officiate in the presence of the god Marduk, whose statue was up there on top of that artificial mountain. So mountains as places where heaven and earth overlap. A little aside, since I'm talking about getting you to exercise your imagination, going to the story in Exodus chapter 24, you have Mount Sinai. Let's just do a rough mountain here like that. You have the mountain, and then Moses is told to build an altar at the foot of the mountain, and there he offers sacrifices to God, and the blood of the animals that are slaughtered for sacrifice were then mixed with water and sprinkled, notice sprinkled, over the people. They were consecrated as his holy priestly people. And God's appearance, God's coming in a cloud and his glory on top of the mountain created three zones. There was the top of the mountain where only Moses was allowed to go. And then there was the part that was fenced off at the bottom of the mountain where the other priests could go and the leaders of Israel could go. And then there is the part here with the altar at the foot of the mountain. This if you like, creates the prototype for the tabernacle and the temple. Jewish scholars talk about the tabernacle as a mobile Mount Sinai. A mobile Mount Sinai. Now, that ceremony in Exodus 24, where God consecrates his people as a holy people with the blood from the animals that were sacrificed, culminates in a holy meal on the mountain. Can you just open your Bibles to Exodus 24? Something happens there which is unparalleled before and after this in the history of God's dealings with his people. And I'd like to just call your attention to this because this is referred to in chapter 8 of Hebrews. Let's pick it up at verse 6 of 24. I'm particularly interested in 9 to 11, but pick it up at verse 6. Could somebody read, please?
And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient."
We will be listeners. We will listen. Yeah, keep going.
And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people.
Threw it's not right. It sprinkled it on the people.
And said, "Behold the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank.
Now, what's unique about this occasion? This is the only time, only occasion in the Old Testament where people actually see God. And they see God safely, and they are unharmed by it. And it happens immediately after their consecration as a holy priesthood, as a holy nation. They eat and drink, or not they, but the Moses and the priests and the leaders of Israel, so the whole nation, they represent the whole nation, eat and drink in God's presence. And they see God. So there's the meal, the offerings, the meat and the flour made into bread from the offerings were eaten by them on the mountain itself, on the holy mountain. Now, it's holy mountain. They eat and drink in God's presence. They behold God. They see God. They remain alive. And there's a little something there. They see God, and under God's feet, there's something like a pavement made of blue substance that's as blue as sapphire. It says like the substance of the sky, the heavens. Now, it's the substance of the heavens. What's happening here on this occasion?
Heaven and earth are being joined together.
Heaven and earth are being joined together. Remember the great pavement in the book of Revelation? The crystal, the sea, the blue sea, on which you have the throne of God. Heaven and earth come together. Heaven and earth overlap on this wonderful occasion. Now, the tragedy is that immediately after this, Moses goes to the top of the mountain to receive the instructions, God's instructions, the regulations to do with the tabernacle and the divine service and the priesthood. And as he's receiving this on top of the mountain, the people at the bottom of the mountain make a golden calf. They're not satisfied with the true theophany, so they make a calf to have a false theophany. The purpose of an idol is to see God, to show God, to put a face to God. It's the means by which God appears, a pagan God appears to his people. So you have the theophany of God on the mountain, the true deal, and then you get the phony substitute at the bottom of the mountain. You know the rest of the story. Two theophanies. Now, there's the theophany at Mount Sinai, and then contrasted with that, we have the theophany in heavenly Zion, heavenly Jerusalem. Now, before I move on, somebody, you had your hand up?
I've always kind of wondered this. It seems to be the truth in Revelation, too, that when someone actually sees God, God himself is not described, but what God is standing on or sitting on is described, but not actually God himself. Is there a reason for that?
Well, quite obviously. Work it out. Like Isaiah has a vision of the Lord high and lifted up, but he's in the temple. He has a vision of the Lord high and lifted up on his throne. And I expect then to have a vision of God sitting in the throne in the Holy of Holies. But he's high and lifted up. He's too big to be contained in the temple. What's the only part of God that Isaiah sees? The train of his robe, etc. So people see, and remember elsewhere, Moses sees the backside of God. He doesn't see the front side of God. You have the vision of Ezekiel, the throne, the mobile throne, and something like a son of man, a man like something, but the description is weird, and to say the least. It's weird from our human point of view, and it's almost impossible to imagine, to describe. So why don't we get descriptions of what people see? Simply, it just can't be described. However much of God people see, and it's very rare occasions that people have a vision of God, it's always incomplete. And why is it incomplete? Because when is the theophany of God going to come? In Christ. And it's very interesting, if you want to just run with this, read each gospel as an account of theophany. The appearance, the revelation, the manifestation of God in the human body of Jesus. Now, just from general knowledge, which of the four Gospels do you think makes the most of this? Luke's fairly strong. John. You could see the whole of John as a depicting of the theophany of God in Jesus. Just listen to the prologue, John 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and tabernacled, this stuff tabernacled among us, and now you get the funny thing, and who's the we? We have beheld his glory, the glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. And from his fullness, we've all received grace upon grace. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. 1895. Indeed. We have beheld his glory, theophany. The theophany of the living God in human flesh. Theophany. And who is included in that we? We have beheld. Notice the perfect tense. Who's the we? Church. The church. It's not just the apostolic we apostles, or Peter, James and John, who saw Jesus on the mountain, that theophany, but we, which is the ecclesial we, the we of the church, seeing the glory of God. We have seen it, and what's the implication? We continue to see the glory of God. We behold it. It's not the usual word for seeing. It's a different kind of seeing, contemplating it, beholding.
Is that the season of Epiphany is designed to present that the theophanies of Christ as the Son?
Yes. The whole of the Epiphany is, there's two words for theophany. One is theophania, and the other one is epiphania. And the emphasis, or the one is the showing of God, and Epiphany is the showing out of God. And God coming, the idea is that God comes to visit his people, to show himself to his people. So the whole season of Epiphany focuses around the Epiphany, the theophany of the living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in the person of Jesus. Beginning with Epiphany, and then immediately after the first Sunday is the baptism of Jesus, which is understood theophanically as theophany.
And concludes with the theophany of the Transfiguration.
Yes, so it begins then with the coming of the wise men and the baptism of Jesus, and it ends with the Transfiguration. And it doesn't stop there, because that's the framework then, liturgically, that we have in mind when we come to the most puzzling event of all aspects of the life of Jesus, is his sufferings and death, which are also to be understood theophanically. Now that's the emphasis on Mark and all the Gospels, particularly Mark and John, is that if you want to see God most clearly in the life of Jesus, you don't see it in his birth or at his baptism or in his ministry, but you see his glory revealed most clearly on the cross. Paradoxically, where God is most hidden, he reveals himself most fully. He reveals not his face, but he shows us. Jesus shows us the Father's heart.
And it's the Roman soldier who says...
And it's the Roman soldier who's the first one to confess. And that's in Mark. He's the first one to recognize, and he doesn't just see what's happening, the events, but he sees, and he doesn't look at Jesus, but he sees Jesus' death. When he saw how Jesus died, then the death, seeing his death, opened his eyes to see the theophany of God in his Son, Jesus. Somebody else had hand up? Now, let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. Two theophanies. Hebrews 12, excuse me, 18 through to 25. I'm beginning to croak like a crow. Who'd like to read that? Yes, please.
For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. Even if even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. You said to 25?
Yeah, no, we'll go to 29, because this is all one unit.
See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, "Yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens." This phrase, "yet once more," indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire.
Just general observations. There's a contrast there between coming to two different places. The translation "come" is not good enough. It's not erchamai, which is come, but proserchamai. You come near, you come close to. So you have the approach to two different mountains. You, plural, have not come to Mount Sinai. You've not come close to God at Mount Sinai, but you've come close to God in heavenly Zion. Proserchamai. And in each of these cases, you have 7 things that are listed. There were 7 features, visible features and audible features, features that were available to the 5 senses. Remember, we've been talking about. So the manifestation of God to all 5 senses at Mount Sinai. And then you have the manifestation of Jesus in heavenly Jerusalem, and 7 invisible aspects of his manifestation. So you have tangible symptoms, tangible trappings, and then you have intangible, unseen trappings of the theophany. Then lastly, just 2 matters of translation. Verse 25 and 26. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. See, notice the word "see" there. See that you do not refuse the speaking one. Who's the speaking one? The nearest antecedent is Jesus, or it could be God. It's probably meant to be both, but the basic focus is Jesus. For if they, that's people in the Old Covenant, didn't escape when they refused him who warned them from heaven, the verb there, warn, is not warn, but who spoke a prophetic oracle, a prophetic word to them from heaven, how much more will we escape if we reject him who, and there's no verb there in Greek, who speaks to us from heaven. I think it would be quite appropriate because that's the nearest antecedent, or who speaks to us prophetically from heaven. Then in verse 29, you have a participle first, and this is the conclusion. Therefore, receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which let us offer to God well-pleasing service with reverence and awe, for God is a consuming fire. So let us have grace, and by means of the grace of God that we have, let us offer to God God-pleasing service. Yes, please?
In verse 25, the one who is speaking, could the antecedent be the better blood?
Yes, it is that. And hence there is no, they refused to listen to the one who spoke the prophetic word to them from heaven, thinking of the 10 Commandments. Okay? Now, make sure that you do not refuse to reject him who speaks in this theophany from heaven here to us here on earth, the speaking blood. That's the nearest antecedent. Yep. So make sure you don't refuse to listen to Jesus, who speaks to you and speaks that gracious something better to you when you come to receive Holy Communion. Now, let's look closely, not closely because we don't have time to look closely, but just get the general picture. First of all, you have depicted the theophany of God at Mount Sinai. Now, taking what were the features of it? There were 7 fearful things, 7 fearful, tangible manifestations of God's presence, his inaccessible presence to people at Mount Sinai. And remember that the mountain is fenced off. And the basic message that the Israelites got was, you must not pass this fence. Don't come onto the mountain. The sanctuary, if you like, is fenced off. You mustn't transgress. This is forbidden. This is closed. This is taboo territory. And everything that happens there reinforces that. Okay, there are 7 manifestations. What are they? First of all, there's the tangible fenced-off mountain that keeps the people away from God and animals away from God. Then there's the blazing fire on top of the mountain. So notice you go from the bottom now up to the top. There's the blazing fire on top of the mountain, the fire of God's glory. Notice fire because we're going to have God's consuming fire soon. That blazing fire, however, is encased in darkness. You think of the mountain, okay? The fire is here at the top of the mountain. That's God's presence, his glory. Then there is darkness that covers the mountain. So the people can't even see the mountain, let alone see God on top of the mountain. There's darkness that covers the mountain. And the further you go to into the mountain, the darker it becomes. So you have general darkness, and then you get deep, deep, eerie darkness. And according to the end of chapter 20, we read that Moses goes to the deep darkness where God is. So paradoxically, you would think the closer that Moses got to God, the more he would come into the light. It's the reverse. The closer Moses comes to God, the deeper the darkness. So you have the general darkness, you have the glory, the general darkness, and you have then the deep, dark, black, thick darkness. Very interesting word there in Hebrew. The eerie gloom. And then there's a storm cloud that encases this. So as if this is not enough, okay, this is the mountain, and then you have a huge storm cloud that towers over and encases the mountain like a big thunderhead. And then, that's visually, you get the sound of a trumpet, or probably more accurately, in the Old Testament, the sound of a horn, sound of a trumpet. Now, what function do trumpets have in the ancient world? They're not that you don't play a tune with trumpets. It signals, so it can either signal alarm, danger is coming, watch out. More commonly, it's an announcement, a call for people to assemble in a particular place. So, for example, if this was the ancient world and if King Obama was coming to visit you here, you'd know about his coming because there would be this shrill trumpet that would be blown by the heralds that would come before him. So the trumpet announces the presence of God, that God has Yarav, he has come down from heaven to earth to meet with his people. So it's the call for the people to assemble at the foot of the mountain. So the trumpet. Notice, first of all, you have touch, a mountain that can be touched. Then you have this visual imagery, fire, 3 kinds of darkness. Now you get to the ear, the sound of the trumpets. Actually, it's the voice of the trumpet. And there's a bit of play there in Exodus. The voice of the trumpet is the voice of God. So you get the trumpet voice of God, which is also the thunder voice of God. And what does the theophany culminate in? God's voice. God's voice. So that's the last thing, and he speaks to whom? He speaks directly to his people at the foot of the mountain. And what words does he speak? It starts off in a nice way. He gives them his name. He introduces himself. I am Yahweh, your God. He commits himself to them, who brought you out of the house of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And then you shall have no other gods. You have the 10 commandments. So you have the commandments of God. So the theophany focuses on and concentrates, culminates in the speaking of the 10 commandments to the people. And what's their reaction to all this? Add all this together, the fenced-off mountain, the fire on top of the mountain, the darkness, the eerie gloom, the cloud, the trumpet, and the voice speaking the 10 commandments. They're terrified. It's a frightening place. So frightening that the people beg Moses to mediate. Okay? They don't want to listen to the voice of God because it's too fearful. It's a voice that gives them a guilty conscience. They can't stomach it. They can't bear it. They can't bear to listen to the voice of God. It's too terrible. It's too frightening for them to take in. So they appoint Moses as their mediator, the one who will listen to the voice of God and then tell them what God says. Okay, now that's the theophany on Mount Sinai. Notice that it culminates in the voice of God speaking the 10 commandments to them, speaking the law of God to them. Now, in contrast to that, we have the other theophany, and notice the contrast here, the 7 things, and I'll read it again. But you have come near, or you have come close, you have approached Mount Zion, the city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem. Number 1. You have come is perfect tense. You have come, you've reached, and you're there. This is where you are, you people sitting here in the pews. You've come to Mount Zion, heavenly Jerusalem, city of the living God. You've come to innumerable angels in festal gathering. Innumerable myriads, that's thousands upon thousands of angels in festal gathering to celebrate a great occasion. You've come to the ecclesia, church, assembly of the firstborn, sons of God, understood, whose names are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the blood, not the sprinkled blood, but the blood of sprinkling, the blood for sprinkling, that speaks something better, that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See then, I'd expect them to say, hear then, that you do not refuse, but see then, so that you do not refuse him who is speaking to you. That's present tense. So see all this so that you don't refuse to hear him as he speaks to you here and now. Present tense. Let's take these one by one. The 7 invisible dimensions, aspects of the divine service. First of all, where are you when you go to church on Sunday? Well, you're in 2 places at one and the same time. On the one hand, you're in your local church, your local congregation, and you do the divine service there. But at the same time, you're in heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God, Mount Zion, the place where God is present, the place where heaven overlaps with earth, the heavenly city. You may remember two things that are significant, or three things that are significant. First of all, what made Jerusalem and its mountain special was the presence of the temple on top of it. If you look at the geography of Jerusalem, the topography, the temple is built on the highest ridge of the city of Old Jerusalem. You have Zion, the ridge going down, the old city, and then on top of that ridge you had the threshing floor of Araunah with a big rock, and that's the top of that part of the hills. The highest place is Mount Zion, not Zion, which is the fortification down here, but you have Mount Zion, and on Mount Zion you have the temple of God. So what makes Mount Zion special? Why does God love Zion more than any other mountain on earth? Why? Even though it's not the highest mountain physically, it is spiritually the highest mountain on earth. It's because God is there with his people. This is where God comes to meet with his people on earth. That's number one. Number two, if you read Isaiah chapter 4, you'll find out that Isaiah prophesies that when the Messiah comes, in the age to come, Jerusalem won't have any temple. It'll be a city without a temple, and the glory of God will fill the whole city, and the cloud will be a canopy over the city, and all the citizens of Zion will be ritually clean. And and it'll be a city without walls because God will protect it by his presence. But notice that it's a city without a temple. Why is it a city without a temple? Because the whole city is the temple. You begin to see that then further on in Isaiah, that's unfolded, and then this becomes very important for the vision of Isaiah. That's the second thing that you need to bear in mind. Thirdly, the great vision of Isaiah, which has to do with God's plan and purpose for his holy city, culminates in God's promise to create a new heavens and a new earth, and in this new heavens and this new earth he will create a new city of Jerusalem, heavenly Zion. So that's Isaiah chapter 55. Now, the preacher here in Hebrews says, what God has promised there in Isaiah has come true for you. You are in that heavenly city. You are standing on holy ground. You are in the presence of the living God here in this place. Secondly, surprisingly, who is all above you? In this place you are surrounded by... No. You are by millions or thousands upon thousands of angels who gather in festal assembly. Panegyris. A panegyris was an assembly of citizens in a Greek city-state to commemorate an important occasion, but most particularly to praise a very important citizen. So let's say, for example, one of the leaders of the city had won a great victory with the army of the city. Then as part of the victory celebrations, there'd be assembly in which people would celebrate the victory and praise their leader. It was a panegyris, a celebration in which they celebrate an important person and his achievements. Now, the angels are all around us, thousands and thousands of them. And what do? They praise who? Jesus. They praise Jesus. And by doing that, they assist us in our praises. So they are liturgizing spirits. They're all around us. They help us to praise the triune God, but most particularly, they help us to focus on Jesus and to praise Jesus and what God accomplishes in and through Jesus. Now, what part of the divine service do we see that being enacted? Sanctus and the Gloria. Angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, and then glory to God in the highest, and in the highest means in high heaven, together with all the angels. Okay, the angels join us, we join them. Now, in the Old Testament, Old Covenant, there was the teaching that there were two choirs. There was the heavenly choir, which were the angels, and there was the earthly choir, the temple choir in Jerusalem. As a result of the incarnation of Jesus, you have those two choirs becoming one choir, a single choir that consists of human beings and angels, which is rather nice to know, because if you're like me, you need all the help that you can get to sing properly. And sometimes it's not enough just to have good singers around you and musicians around you. The angels help us spiritually to praise, glorify the living God. That's number two. Number three, so if you imagine underneath us is holy ground. Above us are the choir of angels to assist us in our praises. All around us is the church, the assembly of God's firstborn sons, whose names are enrolled in heaven. They are fellow citizens with us of the heavenly city. Now, what does the assembly of God's firstborn sons consist of? Strictly speaking, God has only one firstborn son. Who's the firstborn son? Jesus. In the ancient world, the firstborn son inherited the entire estate of his father. And that's what Jesus does. Everything that belongs to his father is inherited by Jesus. But it doesn't stop there. Jesus is our brother, and he shares his inheritance fully with us. And because his inheritance is a spiritual inheritance, we all equally share in all the gifts that Jesus has. So everything that God has, he gives to Jesus. Everything that Jesus has, he gives to all the brothers of Jesus. And they all have the entire inheritance of Jesus. It's mind-blowing. Now, who are the ecclesia, the church of the firstborn, that are all around us, invisibly? What? No, not the saints who've gone before us. We come to them shortly. Who make up the church? Now, you should know your dogmatics. We have two churches. There's the church militant, and then there's the church triumphant. This is the church militant, the worldwide church. So when you go to church on Sunday, you stand in heaven. You're surrounded by the angels. The angels are all over you, and then all around you are all Christians all around the world. The church of God around the world. Now, each of them, from a human point of view, is serving God in a different place, but because they are all joined together in that heavenly assembly, they are then all together with us. So this coming Sunday, when I go to church, I'll be worshipping together with my wife in Australia. I'll be worshipping with my children in Australia. I'll be worshipping together with the friends that I have in Asia or Africa, even elsewhere here in the United States. Yes?
Yeah. You say that because of, it doesn't say that they're there in heaven, it says that they're enrolled.
Yes.
That's the point. Right?
Well, no, we have come to them. They're there.
They're there.
Yes.
But you're saying it's church militant.
Yes.
These are the ones who are enrolled.
They are enrolled. Yes.
So it's not speaking of those who've gone before us.
No, we come to them in a minute.
Exactly. And so these are the ones who are church militant, who are enrolled
just as we've been enrolled. So, we're present day. We have, what's the basic difference between you and me? You are citizens of the USA. I'm not a citizen of the USA. No, I don't have the rights of citizen. I'm a visitor here. If I wanted to live here and enjoy the inheritance that belongs to you as citizens of this country, I'd have to be naturalised. I'd have to become a citizen, and then I could enjoy all the benefits and have all the responsibilities of voting in the next election.
Yes. You don't have that requirement here.
Yes, well, it's different because voting for us is compulsory, because otherwise nobody would ever vote in Australia if it were not compulsory. Okay, it means the existing citizen. This is the citizen's role. So there's a heavenly role where God keeps count of all his citizens on earth. He doesn't have to keep count of all the citizens in heaven because they're there with him. Okay? He keeps a roll of them. Remember what Jesus says when the 70 evangelists come back rejoicing because the demons submit to them in his name. He says, don't rejoice the fact the demons submit to the name, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. That you are a citizen of the heavenly city, and as such you live here on earth. Now you need to know a person. Everybody at the time when this letter was written would realise that something very special had happened in their own lifetime, which was unique in human history. The genius of the Romans was that they extended Roman citizenship to people all around the empire. So you didn't have to live in Rome to become a citizen of Rome. So Paul was a citizen of Rome, and he enjoyed all the rights and privileges, as well as all the responsibilities of every Roman citizen. So there was a roll that was kept, and it got bigger and bigger, of people who were technically citizens of Rome. In fact, most of the citizens of Rome didn't live in Rome. They were scattered all over the empire. Rome prided itself as the eternal city. It wasn't built on one hill, but it was built on 7 hills. We get references to that in the book of Revelation. How are we going? We'll stop at the next point. Now, 7. In the New Testament, everywhere in Old Testament and contemporary literature, lists are very significant. Lists are a didactic device. I don't know if you make lists for yourself. I do it all the time, and Claire does it for me to make sure that I do what she tells me to do. Okay? Now, if you have a list, let's say you have a list of 7 things. Now, the arrangement of lists is if lists are mnemonic devices, so it helps you to memorize stuff. They're also didactic devices. There are 3 things that you need to know about this. There are, 3, that's easy enough. The second list is 5, because that's the fingers of your hand. 10, fingers of 2 hands. Mnemonic didactic lists. If you're going to be a good teacher or good preacher, you say, first point, second point, third point. That's an implied list there. Let's say you have a list of 7 items. Why 7?
Complete.
It's the complete number. It's the perfect number. If you want to say everything there is to say about something, you make a list of 7 things. Okay? Now, if you have a list of 7 things, there are 3 significant positions in the ordering of the list. Which are the 3 significant positions, and why are they significant? Yes? 1. Okay, one, what's the significance of 4? Number 1 frames it. Okay? Everything else that follows needs to be understood in the light of this topic. This is foundational. What's the next one? 4. What's the significance of 4? It's the center. This is the focal point. This is the pivot of the list. But what's the most important part of the list?
7.
Number 7. Everything leads up to this. Now, let's stop here. We'll take the list after lunch and we'll look at number 4. And the question I want to ask you is, why is this put here? Why is it put here? And secondly, why does the list end where it ends here? Number 7. Now, who's leaving again? Okay, God bless, brothers. Thanks for coming here.